Hey, what is up? My name is Chris and welcome to Coding in Public. Today I have built a habit tracker. It's got a couple of cool features to it. Number one, you got this light and dark mode toggle so you can go back and forth. And because it saves it in local storage, even if you refresh the page, it stays on whatever theme you last chose. Then you can come in here and you can add a new habit. Right now I just have a grid of icons you can choose from. So like, let's say you come in here, choose the book and say, read a book, something like that. And then you add the habit down here and it populates automatically. Now you can check it off by clicking and it'll stay checked. Again, everything is saved in local storage. Come and right click and you get both the title, so you get your own kind of custom context menu, and then you can delete the habit, which will delete it both from the UI and from the backend, actually saving it to your local storage. So we're going to jump in today, and what I want to do today is not just work on like HTML and CSS, but kind of iterate on this. So kind of more like you would do a traditional project where you'd have a base layer and then say, okay, now I'm going to add this functionality and then this functionality. So let me kind of walk you through what I did. Okay, so here's our directory, and it's just pretty basic. I'm not even writing SCSS, don't have anything like Parcel set up. It's just a base CSS file, a JavaScript file, and an index.html file. Let me go ahead and pull up this README. This is kind of what I did when I first started working on this project. Rather than say, let's start with the HTML and CSS and kind of fully imagine it, let me just start with the base functionality. So I don't have any adding buttons, it's just all hard-coded. And then next I thought, how can I add new habits? And then I thought, let's custom delete those. Then I thought, let's do a light and dark mode. Then I said, we need to save this to local storage. Eventually, maybe I could do something like tracking the streaks day by day, how many days in a row you've done it. But this is how a more traditional project would go, where you'd start with kind of base functionality and then work your way up from there. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to do really basic functionality where it's just everything's hard-coded, and then next time we'll work on adding new habits, custom habits yourself. Then we'll work on a right-click, and I don't know how many videos this will take us, but I figured kind of walking through this process might be helpful. Well, enough talking, let's get into some code. So we're going to come over here to our index.html page, and I just want to show you that I've got a basic style script set up for the font, and I've got, let's see, my CSS file up here, and then the JavaScript file deferred, so it'll load after the body. Let's come in here to the body then, and let's start working on stuff. Let me go ahead and hide the sidebar here and give us a little bit more visibility on the code we're writing. Now I mentioned I wasn't going to do the light and dark mode toggle yet, but because it's pretty basic to add in the HTML, let's just do it now so we don't have to remember later. So I'm going to do this in a little section tag here, and we're just going to call this theme container. And then inside here is where we'll have our button toggle. So I'll have a class of theme and then an ID of theme. Typically, I try to select the IDs in JavaScript and the classes in HTML, but you know, it's fine either way. We're going to stylize this all in CSS, so we're just going to leave it like that. That's it. Next, we've got the habits themselves, and I'm going to wrap all of these in a section tag with a class of habit container. And then each of the habits will be in their own div, and because we're hard coding this, later we'll add this in JavaScript, but for now, since we're hard coding this, I'll go ahead and just add it as a habit class, so a div with a habit class. And just thinking about kind of the UX of this, it'd be nice if this was a button so people could tab to it and then actually trigger like the class of completed on and off with just their keyboard. So I'll add this as a button with the class of habit button. And then inside here, we'll add an SVG. Now I'm going to add these inline, and I went ahead and grabbed these icons. They're from iconic.app, iconic.app. And so they've got these free available icons. You have to have an account, but other than that, they are free to use however you want. So that's where I grabbed them from. So like, let's come in here and open the book, and I'll just copy this out. Now you might be wondering, why am I taking the time to add these inline? Well, when you add them inline, you get access to the current color of the parent element, the button itself, which means you can shift the color based on the button color. And so when we're triggering the habit as completed or not completed, we can very easily switch the color, the stroke of the SVG without doing any extra work. So that's why I'm adding them inline here. And then I'll go ahead and collapse this. So this is how all of our buttons will look. And I'm just going to go ahead and let's copy this down. Let's do like 6 or so. 4 is fine. Let's do 4. And then I've refreshed and you see them over this way. By default, the color is black, so that's why they're picking up black from the button itself. For now, we're going to add just one more thing in our HTML here. So I'll come down here, we're going to add one more thing. We're going to add that plus button at the bottom below kind of the grid of habits. So I will call that, it'll be a section tag, and I'll call it new habit. And inside here, like before, I'll have a button, and this will have new habit add. That's what it'll be. And then we'll add an SVG in here as well. So let's open the sidebar again, and I think I had it as, let's see, there was like a plus icon. Let's come over here and check. Plus, and we'll add it right here, and then let me copy the code, and then paste it in. Okay, perfect. Let's come back to our habit tracker. I think that's mostly everything. Let's see, I think I had an H1 tag at the top here. So right up here, H1, and I think I just said something like my habit tracker. So that's the base of the HTML. Let's work on the CSS, and then we will switch back and do a little bit of JavaScript and call it good for this first iteration. So I've gone ahead and done a few things just so you don't have to watch me type in colors. I've got a basic clear set on here, and then I've got these root variables set up, the different colors that we're going to use. Primary, secondary, light, danger, which is this red color, shadow for kind of the outline of the box that pops up for adding new habits. I've got a base size for everything, and then a small, medium, and large in reverse order for no apparent reason. And then I've got this dark class that when it's applied switches the colors to these different colors. Then on the body, I've just added our actual font family and then our background color. By setting up these variables ahead of time, that means that we don't have to waste as much time typing a bunch of stuff. We can just use these variables, and that will keep us consistent and keep the UI looking similar throughout. Let's give ourselves a little bit more space, and what we're going to do, just to kind of preview what it'll look like, is, again, you're going to have some kind of title right here and then a grid of icons that will automatically adjust as there's more added or taken or some taken away. And then below that, we'll have this plus button, and that'll be it. So that's what we're going to focus on today. Let's come back to the body. We're going to, first of all, add some padding that will give it a little space from the outside of the actual window. So let's use one of our variables here of medium. If you haven't used CSS variables before, it's great because you can update them even with JavaScript or things like that. And then the bigger thing is it allows you to be consistent throughout your web page. We're also going to do a display of grid and place items center. Maybe you're used to using Flex on this, where you do justify content center and align items center. This does the same thing. It's just one less line of code. If I save it, you see it come to the middle. Next, let's make sure that the default color for the body is our secondary color, and that will change all the text to that blue color by default. Now, we had a few things. We had that theme container up top, and even though we're not going to do a whole lot with it yet, let's go ahead and just style it so we can actually see it. So first of all, let's give it some padding, and we're going to use one of our variables. Again, I'm going to use that small variable, which is just a little bit bigger than 16 pixels. Now, right now you can't see anything. Let's put a border of like 3 pixels. Let's do 1 pixel. 1 pixel solid and red, just so you can see what we're working with. Okay, so it's that section right there. Currently, it has a button in it that has nothing inside of it. Just like up above here, we're going to take this display grid and place item center and add it right in here. And then let's grab the theme itself. The theme is the actual button. So I'll grab it, and let's add a default width of 50 pixels. Actually, is the theme the button? I'm trying to remember now. That doesn't seem right. Yeah, it is. Okay. So we're going to add a width of 50 pixels and then a height of 25 pixels. And by adding it as a button, you get a bunch of kind of cool UX stuff, like being able to tab to it. It highlights automatically. There's some stuff like that, especially for accessibility, that having it as a button helps. And then we're going to add a background color. And we're going to use our same blue color, that secondary color for the background. When I save it here, you see it pop up, and you can see the padding around the theme container itself. So now that I've got that, let's remove the border. You can see everything we're working with. All right, now we had a border radius on this, and let's use our var of base, even though it's anything will work, basically probably 16 pixels and above, because we're just trying to get that pill shape. Now we're going to use a pseudo element to actually show that little icon that switches back and forth when we switch between the light and dark mode. So that means this needs to be a position of relative so that we can position the pseudo element as position absolute. And then we want a cursor of pointer. And that will make sure that as we hover over it, it actually shifts to a cursor. Now let's go ahead and just show what that button will look like, even though we're not going to do anything too crazy with it, because that's for iteration number 2. But remember, pseudo elements always have to have a content, so even if it's nothing, it has to have that. We'll do a width of 20 pixels and a height of 20 pixels. Oh, not Moz appearance. Height of 20 pixels. And then a background color. And we're going to use our var of primary. And when I save it here, you're not going to see anything show up. And that's because we need to do a few things. First of all, we need to say position absolute so that it actually has some kind of positioning. And you see now it shows up, but then I want to actually position it where I need it to go. So we'll do a top of 2 pixels and save it. And you see it moves up the right direction. And then I'll do a left of 3 pixels. Now you might say, well, what kind of secrets do you have for placing it exactly in the right place? I don't. I just kind of played with it until I got it right. And so that's what our secret is. Don't tell anyone. Border radius, 50%. That'll make it a full circle. And then I'm going to go ahead and throw a transition on here of all 300 milliseconds and ease in and out. So that way, as it switches back and forth, it will slide back and forth kind of slowly. Just to make sure it's on top of some of the other things, like those icons we'll eventually add for like the moon and the sun to show light and dark mode. Let's do a Z index. I like to put these next to the absolute so I just remember what they are. We'll do like 3 or something like that. Okay, so we've got this basic toggle going here. Let's see. It probably wouldn't be too hard to go ahead and add the JavaScript just to switch this back and forth, even if it doesn't do a whole lot. Oh man, now I'm already adding another feature. Let's just save that for now. I said we would wait and iterate, so let's wait and iterate. Let's move on then to the H1 tag itself. That's the title, and we're not going to do too much here besides say font size. We want it to be var of medium. And that will use our medium font size and make our title a little bit bigger. All right, next let's grab our habit container itself, and we're going to do display of grid here. And you could also do flex on this too. I just really prefer grid when I'm able to use it. You're not always able to use it, and sometimes it's not best, but here I think it works great. You can do auto fit and then min max. We'll do 100 pixels and 1 FR. FR is a new size unit that's come along with grid, and it means 1 fraction. And so let's, once again, let's add a border of 1 pixel solid and red, just so we can see kind of the area we are working with. Come back here and let's add a padding because we want a little more space around the sides there. So up top, we're going to do small, and then on the side, we'll do a medium. Next, we're going to set a max width on this of 400 pixels because we only want it to be so big, and then we'll switch this around in a second. You'll see those stacked 2 by 2 at most. And that means it's kind of automatically responsive because it's actually meant essentially for just a mobile device. One of the iterations you could do in the future would be to make a more friendly kind of desktop version that would use more of the screen real estate. But I think with a simple habit tracker, something like this works great. One of the main reasons I like using grid is because the grid gap property is pretty well supported. And so you can easily add a grid gap, which basically says the space between the children of this grid container. And so that's what we've done. Let's come in here now and grab an actual habit. Habits are the divs that hold these buttons. So we're going to use display grid here again and place item center. And that's all we're going to do on these. And that will place the buttons in the center of the divs themselves. Maybe what we should do is now bring this down, since you can see what the border looks like on the actual container. Now you can see what it looks like on the divs themselves. And this grid gap of 1 rem gives us that spacing that we want between everything. And I realized I'm not getting a lot of space here, and I think it's because, yeah, our variable was not typed correctly. So if I pull that back there, let's put the border back on so you can see what that looks like. You see now we've got padding around the parent, and then the children here are spaced out by that grid gap perfectly. Inside our habit, we had a habit button. We're going to set this to a width of large, and then we'll do the same thing for the height. So a height of large, and you'll see that those buttons get a lot bigger. We're going to set the border radius to 50%. That will make them straight circles like we did up above. And then a background color, we'll do a var primary. And then when I save it, you should see that doesn't really help us too much because now it just fades into the background. So let's go ahead and add a border on it, and we'll do 6 pixels solid, and we'll do a var of secondary. And now you should be able to see kind of where those buttons lie. We will go ahead and change the color, and remember, because we added those icons in line, now the color will update the actual SVG as well. So we'll say that also needs to be a secondary color, and you see that that updates to the blue color for us. Now, again, you might be able to see that these aren't in the center of the button. The icons aren't, so let's do display grid and place items center. I told you I like to use this, and that should put everything directly in the center. Now, by default, buttons don't actually show you any kind of cursor, so we will want to say cursor of pointer. And let's see, is there anything else? We're going to transition on and off that completed class, so let's go ahead and add a transition. And we'll do all 300 milliseconds ease in and out. And I could probably do this as a variable as well, but I think there's only a few times I'm adding it, so I'm just going to leave it like this for now. Now there's a few things we want to do. When we come in here and trigger this completed class, we want it to switch between this light background and a dark background. And we're going to do that with a class called completed. So let's come in here to habit button.completed. That means both of those classes must be applied. When they're both applied, what we want to do is change the background color to our var of secondary. And we want to change the color of the text to our var of primary. Now, I haven't added completed yet, so we're not going to be able to see that. I could change it manually, but for now, let's just keep moving, and we'll change that here just in a second in the JavaScript. I do want to come in here and add a bit of a hover state. So let me add a hover, and we're just going to do something simple like an opacity of 0.8. Now there's kind of one other thing you need to know. Because we've got an SVG in here, we could actually come and instead of clicking on the button, we could technically click on the SVG. So let's make sure that we've disabled that. So we'll come in here to the habit button, and we'll say an SVG inside of it, which is what the selector means. So you've got a space, that means an SVG inside a habit button. We want to say pointer events of none. And then let's go ahead and actually shift up the size too. That seems kind of small to me. So we'll say width. Let me just grab it from up here and pull it down for the SVG. So instead of large, let's say medium. If you select something and then hit Command D on a Mac, or I think it's Control D on a PC, it'll select the next instance. So we've got both of those selected, and now our habit buttons look awesome. All right, lastly for our CSS, let's come down here and let's grab our habit. What do we call that? The adding section. New habit. Okay, so new habit and new habit add. So you come in here and say our new habit. We're going to make this a slightly smaller button than the one up above. So let's grab our width and height from the SVG, and let's just make that the width and the height for the new habit button as well. We'll set the same border radius of 50% to make it a full circle. And then we'll grab a background color, var secondary, and the color of the SVG will be our var of primary. We won't be shifting that in and out. Say display grid, and then place items center, you know the drill. And then let's add our same transition on here of all 300 milliseconds ease in and out. And then a cursor of pointer. So it actually shows the cursor when you hover over it. Now let me check to see if I'm following everything correctly. Okay, so I've got this new section habit. I think I meant to add this to the button itself. So let's change the class around here. This should be new habit add. Okay, so that shows like we want it to, and it's in the middle. I just did it on the wrong class. Let's come in here and remove our temporary borders, our border of 1 pixel solid red and our border of 1 pixel solid red. And we're going to call that basically complete for the CSS and the HTML. We will however, go ahead and add a few things to JavaScript. All we want to do is trigger this completed class when we click on this back and forth, and then we're going to leave this alone. So for now, let's come in here, and what we're going to do is grab all the habits themselves. So we'll say const habits equals query selector all, and we're going to grab everything with the class of habit. And then let's just go ahead and add an event lister. Let's save it. Let's come down here and say habits.for each habit. And then we're going to do an arrow function here and say habit.add event listener. So we're saying on each habit, each thing with a class of habit, add an event listener. And now eventually we're going to actually have to shift this around and add it to the container itself. But rather than explaining that now, I'll explain it in the next video when we work on that. So the event listener we're looking for is a click. And then let's write this again as an arrow function. And we're just going to say when it's clicked, let's console log clicked. And we'll save this, come over here, hit Command Option J, and that will pull up the console. And then let's click stuff. Clicked, 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 clicked. Okay, cool. So let's say class or habit.classlist.add completed. And let's see if this completes our first iteration. So we come in here, we click. Oh no, what's happening? Let's select this and see what's happening. Are we adding the actual... Oh, we're adding it to the habit. We want to add it to the habit button. That is a pretty quick switch. So we'll just come in here and say habit button. All right, refresh, click. Hey, let's get rid of this mobile view. Perfect. All right, now when I refresh, you see it all disappears, but that's because this is a first iteration. So here you've got to hard code everything, but once you've got a habit in place, you can just click and it will show as completed. You can click again and it doesn't remove itself. So let's come in here and change one more thing. We'll say this needs to toggle rather than add. So if it has it, it doesn't have it, it adds it. If it has it, it takes it off. Okay, we're going to call that complete for the first kind of go around. Next time we will add this light and dark mode switch, which I almost added today, but we saved that. And then we'll add this add functionality and just keep it real basic for now. Maybe just show the pop-up modal, and then maybe in a third video, we'll kind of finalize it. Now, I will go ahead and include the code. Once we get to that third video, I'll include it in all of these videos. But for now, if you're following along, go ahead and just try to do this along with me, or just look at the finished product and try to do it yourself. That works just as great. Well, for now, thanks so much for watching. If you like this kind of thing and you want to see part 2 and part 3, hit subscribe so you don't miss those. Like the video, and I will catch you next time. Happy coding.